They did not mean to care this much, and that is exactly why they cannot break free from it now. What began as something light, something they thought they could handle, has already moved past a line they never noticed, and now, no matter how hard they try to stay calm, it follows them. Love almost never starts as a clear choice. Most of the time it rises from hidden layers of the mind, from quiet processes working far below awareness. When a person seems to fall for someone, what is really happening is a slow alignment of emotional triggers, old memories, unmet needs, and private projections all moving in one direction. They do not sit down and choose this shift. It feels more like something taking hold of them, like an unseen force pulling them somewhere they cannot fully explain. At the deepest level, attraction is not only about looks or surface traits, it is about what the mind recognizes in the other person. A certain tone, a certain habit, a certain emotional energy can wake up patterns that were built long before this moment. These patterns often come from early emotional experiences, unfinished attachments, or ideal pictures of connection stored in the mind. When someone reflects those hidden patterns without even trying, the mind reads it as familiarity, intensity, even destiny. And that is where it starts, quietly, invisibly. While the conscious mind still thinks it is only observing, comparing, or talking casually, the deeper mind has already started building the bond. Stay with this, because this is where the trap closes without warning. Attachment often forms before a person can clearly say what is happening, because the mind does not build connection in a straight, logical way. It builds through small emotional moments that gather under the surface, a look that feels heavier than it should, a conversation that brings comfort too quickly, a moment of being understood without having to explain every part of yourself. None of these moments seem life-changing on their own, yet together they begin shaping an inner map of closeness. The unconscious side of the mind cares more about emotional resonance than logical judgment. So while the conscious mind may still label the connection as casual, uncertain, or just friendly, the deeper emotional system is already recording signs of safety, curiosity, relief, and longing. That early attachment is subtle. It does not arrive with a loud announcement. It shows up as extra attention, increased sensitivity to what that person says or does, and a growing sense of anticipation when they appear or when they do not. And here is the part people miss. Inconsistency can strengthen attachment just as much as consistency, sometimes even more. Moments of closeness followed by distance leave a deeper mark than steady contact, because the mind starts trying to solve the emotional uncertainty. It keeps returning to the same person, the same signals, the same unanswered feeling. By the time someone realizes they are emotionally invested, the structure is already built. The feeling seems sudden only because awareness arrived late. The bond itself was forming long before that. And if you have ever wondered why a person says, "I did not see this coming," this is why. The truth is, it was already happening in the background, step by step, long before the mind caught up. The mind naturally resists anything that disturbs its inner balance, even when that disturbance feels exciting. So when someone starts feeling a strong emotional pull toward another person, a conflict begins. One part feels drawn in, another part feels threatened. The conscious mind may call it interest, curiosity, or chemistry, but the deeper layers of the mind often register it as danger to stability. That is where resistance begins, not because the feeling is fake, but because the feeling is powerful. Attraction can wake up parts of a person that have been asleep for years: vulnerability, dependency, need, longing, the wish to be seen, the fear of not being enough. And once those parts rise, they can shake the image a person has of themselves. So the psyche does what it has always done when overwhelmed. It tries to protect order, it pulls back, it explains things away. It minimizes what is happening so control can be restored. But that resistance is not the absence of desire, it is the reaction to what desire exposes. When someone means too much, they become more than just a person. They become a mirror. They reflect the parts of the self that feel incomplete, hidden, or split apart. The mind senses this and tries to reject the intensity, even while the attraction remains strong. That is why someone can act confused, distant, or cold, while still feeling deeply affected. They may call it distraction. They may call it overthinking. They may pretend it is bad timing, but often it is something much deeper. It is the mind struggling with emotional depth that feels too big to fit into its usual structure. And this is where it gets deeper, because the stronger the feeling becomes, the more resistance it can create. When emotional intensity rises past a certain point, it can trigger fear, even if the experience itself feels beautiful. This fear is not usually logical. It comes from the nervous system reacting to intensity as if intensity itself were a threat. What feels like closeness at one level can feel like loss of control at another, creating a split between desire and avoidance. The human mind wants predictability. It wants order. It wants to feel that everything inside is manageable. But when one person enters your emotional world in a serious way, that order starts to shift. Thoughts grow louder. Attention becomes fixed. Reactions become harder to hide and harder to regulate. At first, this may feel thrilling. Then it can turn into unease because the person is no longer operating inside their usual emotional rhythm. Fear rarely arrives as open panic. More often it appears as hesitation, overthinking, withdrawal, silence, or sudden detachment. The person may not even know what they are afraid of. They only know that they are too affected, and that alone feels risky. Vulnerability is often read as danger, even when the connection is good. The mind does not quickly separate safe intensity from unsafe intensity. It reacts to strength first. If something feels too strong, too fast, or too consuming, the instinct is to reduce contact, reduce exposure, reduce emotional risk, and that creates the great paradox. The very depth that pulls someone closer can also make them step back, not because they do not want the connection, but because part of them does not know how to hold it. If you have ever seen someone move toward love and then retreat the second it becomes real, this is why. They are not always running from you. Sometimes they are running from what you awaken inside them. Projection is one of the strongest reasons certain connections feel so intense. A person does not only see the other individual for who they are, the mind quietly lays internal images over them, filling the space with old hopes, old pain, old unmet needs, and hidden expectations. This happens automatically. The person usually does not know they are doing it. When someone stirs deep emotion, the mind begins using stored psychological material to complete the picture. Past relationships, childhood patterns, ideal dreams of intimacy, old fears of rejection, all of it can be placed onto the new person without either side realizing it. That is why attraction can feel far bigger than the actual history between two people. The emotional charge is not based only on reality, it is based on meaning. The other person begins to represent safety, understanding, validation, completion, or even emotional danger, whether or not they truly embody those things. And because of that, reactions become exaggerated. A small message can feel huge. A tiny gesture can feel unforgettable. A delayed response can feel strangely painful. The emotional system is not responding only to what happened outside. It is responding to the deep inner meaning attached to it. Over time, this blurs the line between reality and imagination. The person starts relating not just to the actual individual, but to the inner image they have created around them. That is what gives some connections their obsessive, consuming quality. It feels like the other person has unbelievable power, when in truth much of that power comes from the mind engaging with its own unrecognized material through another human face. Keep listening, because once this starts, the connection is no longer just about two people. It becomes a meeting between a person and the hidden parts of themselves. When someone becomes emotionally important, they often stop being seen as a fully separate person and start becoming a reflective surface for the observer's unconscious life. This does not happen through choice. It happens through constant emotional association. The mind keeps comparing what is outside with what is unresolved inside, and when a person touches that unresolved material, they begin to carry meaning far beyond their actual words or actions. In this state, they become symbolic. They may represent softness that was never allowed, confidence that was never developed, intimacy that was always feared, or danger that was always expected. Because these qualities are not yet fully owned within the self, the mind places them onto the other person and then reacts as if the intensity belongs completely to the relationship. But much of the force comes from self-recognition. A simple moment of attention can feel profound because it wakes up a neglected part of the self that has waited a long time to be acknowledged. As this continues, the emotional boundary between self and other becomes less clear. Even absence starts carrying weight. Silence becomes meaningful. Distance becomes loaded. The connection feels deep because it no longer lives only in shared interaction. It also lives in the private emotional world of the person experiencing it. This is why some relationships feel transformative and destabilizing at the same time. They are not just encounters with another person, they are encounters with disowned pieces of the self appearing through another person's presence. And once that happens, it becomes difficult to return to emotional neutrality, because the issue is no longer only whether the other person stays or leaves. The deeper issue is what they have already revealed. They have shown the mind something it had hidden from itself, and that kind of revelation does not disappear just because the connection becomes complicated. This is where inner conflict becomes intense. Two opposite forces activate at once. One force moves toward emotional closeness because it feels rewarding, healing, or complete. The other force pushes back because closeness threatens autonomy, control, and the image of the self as stable and self-contained. These forces do not take turns politely. They clash beneath awareness, creating mixed signals, unstable behavior, and shifting moods that confuse everyone involved. A person may feel strongly connected one day and distant the next. They may seem warm, then suddenly guarded. They may reach out, then pull away. That does not always mean their feelings are weak. Often it means different parts of the psyche are fighting for control. This push and pull becomes even stronger when the emotional experience is deep or unfamiliar. If someone is not used to genuine emotional intimacy, the nervous system may read it as dangerous rather than safe. So attraction becomes tangled with fear. Desire mixes with defense. Closeness feels good, but it also feels like exposure. To reduce the discomfort, the mind starts rationalizing. It may blame timing, compatibility, lifestyle, or circumstances. Those reasons can sound convincing. Sometimes they are partly true, but often the deeper cause is internal conflict. The mind wants a clean explanation for feelings that are actually messy, layered, and difficult to hold. Over time, this creates emotional instability inside the relationship itself. The connection becomes charged with uncertainty, not only because of what the other person does, but because one person is carrying opposing impulses that have not been made conscious. And until that inner split is faced, attraction and resistance will continue living side by side, shaping the connection from the shadows. What the mind denies does not vanish. It changes form and keeps working from a hidden level. When a person pushes away a feeling, a need, a fear, or a desire because it feels uncomfortable or unacceptable, they are not removing it. They are only pushing it out of awareness, and once it is pushed down, it does not become silent. It keeps looking for expression. In relationships, that denied material often appears in amplified form through another person. Someone may feel strangely obsessed, deeply triggered, or emotionally shaken by a connection without realizing that the root of the intensity is inside them. The psyche has a natural way of compensating. It tries to restore balance by drawing attention back to what has been excluded. The more firmly something is denied, the more pressure it creates below the surface. That pressure can show up as fixation, confusion, mental repetition, or the feeling of being unable to let someone go even when it would be easier to walk away. The mind keeps circling the same emotional territory because it has not yet been fully understood or integrated. Denial also changes perception. Instead of seeing the inner state directly, the person assumes all the emotion is being caused by outside events. The other person becomes loaded with meaning that actually belongs to the inner world, and because of that, intensity rises while clarity falls. This is why people sometimes feel controlled by a connection they do not even fully understand. The real force is not only the relationship, it is the relationship plus everything in the self that has been pushed out of sight, and the psyche does not allow hidden material to stay buried forever. It keeps bringing it back through repeated thoughts, emotional discomfort, and relational experiences until it is finally recognized. Love can also weaken a person's sense of control, even when they want the experience. Control here does not only mean outer behavior, it also means inner regulation, the feeling that your thoughts, emotions, and attention belong fully to you. When attachment grows strong, that stability begins to shift. Thoughts repeat themselves. Attention returns again and again to one person. Reactions become more immediate and harder to manage. The mind no longer moves in its normal balanced pattern. It begins organizing itself around the emotional object of attachment. This creates the feeling that something outside is influencing the inner world in ways that cannot be easily stopped. That loss of control often feels uncomfortable because the human mind craves coherence. It wants to believe it is directing itself, but strong emotion can interrupt that sense of order. Even positive emotion, if intense enough, can override familiar patterns of regulation. What makes this stronger is how spontaneous emotional reactions can be. A memory, a small reminder, A pause in communication, a certain phrase, even a certain time of day can trigger feeling without permission. That unpredictability creates the impression that emotion is happening to the person rather than coming from within them, and so love begins to feel less like a chosen state and more like an immersive condition that interrupts rational control. In response, the mind often swings between surrender and defense. One part wants closeness because closeness brings emotional reward. Another part wants distance so control can be restored. This swing itself reinforces the sense of instability. The person no longer feels fully self-directed. They feel influenced, moved, and emotionally rearranged by attachment. And for many people, that is exactly what makes the experience both irresistible and frightening. But emotional confrontation can also change a person in a lasting way. When someone is exposed to feelings they cannot easily avoid, explain away, or control, the psyche is forced to face material it would usually keep far in the background. This can involve attachment, fear, dependency, shame, longing, identity, and old patterns of connection that were never fully understood. The experience rarely feels gentle. It feels disruptive because it shakes the structure of how a person sees themselves and how they think relationships work. As emotional intensity rises, contradictions become impossible to ignore. A person may feel desire and fear at the same time, clarity and confusion, need and resistance. These opposites are not random. They show that deeper layers of the psyche are being activated. The conscious mind hates holding contradictions. It wants simple answers. Yet transformation begins exactly in that tension. Once something deep has been stirred, the psyche cannot fully return to its previous state without dealing with what has surfaced. So reflection begins, even if the person does not want it. They start questioning their reactions, their attachment style, their boundaries, and the stories they tell themselves about control. Even avoidance becomes part of the process, because what a person avoids usually points directly toward what carries emotional charge. Over time, repeated emotional confrontation softens rigid assumptions. The person starts seeing that their feelings are not created only by outside events. They are shaped by inner interpretations, old memories, and hidden needs. That shift changes everything. Attention moves inward, blame weakens, understanding grows. Transformation does not always arrive with dramatic closure. Often it happens slowly, through repeated contact with emotionally charged moments that cannot be dismissed. And before the person fully understands it, they have already started changing. By the time awareness finally reaches the connection, the bond is often already there. Emotional attachment is not built at the moment someone says, "I think I love them." It is built quietly, layer by layer, through repeated interaction, emotional imprinting, anticipation, absence, interpretation, and unconscious meaning. Awareness comes later. It is not the start of the process. It is the delayed recognition of something already unfolding. The mind builds relational meaning through repetition. Every exchange leaves a trace. Every pause leaves a trace. Every feeling of being seen, every moment of distance, every flash of emotional intensity settles into memory systems that care more about significance than logic. So when awareness finally arrives, it feels sudden only because it enters after the structure has already formed. That is why realization can feel heavy, irreversible, almost shocking. The person believes they are deciding in real time, but often they are only noticing an emotional pattern that has already been shaping their attention and behavior for a long while. And once that awareness appears, it changes the experience again. Now the person sees how little conscious control was involved in the beginning. They see that connection is not always chosen moment by moment. It is often built in silence, in hidden layers, before the conscious mind even knows what it is looking at. That is the hard truth. They never expected to care this much. They never planned to let it get this deep. But the structure is already there. The bond has already taken shape. And when they finally understand what they feel, they are not standing at the beginning of the story. They are standing in the middle of something that has already been quietly changing them for a long time.